Yep.
Okay,
Well,
we are live. Good morning. Welcome to Brave Indigenous Conversations with Joan Jack. And I begin the same every time by reading, so far, might change it, I don't know, by reading a piece of writing I found. So that's why, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I'm looking down. I haven't memorized it. And this is called Brave Space. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds in this space. We seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. That was written by Mickey Scott B. Jones, who is a Black woman activist who's gone to the spirit world. And when it was introduced to me, I just loved it. So, for those of you that
amazing.
are new to the podcast, my name is Joan Jack, and I am an Anishinaabe. I'm from Barons River, Manitoba. I don't usually introduce myself very much, but just Google me, you'll see. And today I have a very good friend of mine and someone who I've come to think of as a brother, as a part of my family. And in our culture, Louay, we always invite people to introduce themselves. So that's what I'm going to do. So, would you mind introducing
Yeah.
yourselves to the listeners?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to start by saying I'm John's brother, and my name is Louay Alghoul. I am. I'm. It sounds funny, but I want to start by saying I consider myself to be blessed to be a human, in the sense of being in touch with my brothers and sisters in humanity and feeling for them. I was very blessed to be involved in the work of Indigenous work back in 2009, which honestly have opened my eyes to become less prejudiced as to what I thought I knew about the Aboriginal culture. Because I came in Canada in 1989, a 17-year-old kid. Nobody introduced me to anything, and nobody told me what is Canada, what's the culture, who's the people. But as I grew here, I was influenced by what most people see and hear, which is not the truth. And unfortunately, as John said, we all have things that we want to improve on. And one of the things I was very blessed that the Spirit and God has put me in is in the path of understanding and appreciating the Indigenous culture and Aboriginal culture in Canada. I myself, as an Indigenous to Palestine, my family and my people lived there um, about 2,000 years before Abraham immigrated there from Iraq. Um, so I feel the roots of the claim of being an indigenous to a land, and I respect everybody who says the same thing. I don't think it's. Some people argue against it, and I think that's silly. I think you should really appreciate people for who they are, where they come from, and instead of being closed-minded or trying to put people in box, open your mind and don't be afraid. Just be brave. That's like what my sister said.
Mhm.
Just be brave and try to uh, just listen and understand and appreciate. And I want to say I've been a student to the Indigenous culture in Canada. I'm still learning a huge deal as we speak. Joan and I were been blessed to work also in the residential school cases, and I was blessed to be introduced to her um, in interesting circumstances. But she's a leader. She is honest in what she says, and she doesn't care who likes her or doesn't like her. She she is. She has this term I like. You have a term, Joan, that you use called real butter, which I like to use a lot, even though I don't eat butter. But I think it's just it's true. When I first met Joan, she was overwhelming, but she was my kind of people. I
Mhm.
just jumped immediately because she didn't have any boundaries. She didn't have any politically correct views. She didn't have anything. She was just heart, and that's how I am and my people. And I think the first time I met her over lunch, I ate from her plate or something. I can't remember, but something like that. But it's just it's just who I am, who
Yeah.
she is. So I'm very blessed to be here and very honored to be here.
Mm,
Uh, and honestly, I feel more connected to the Indigenous and Aboriginal culture and people of Canada. Um, it's just the culture, the value of the family, the value of the respect to the elders, the value of the land. We hold the same values that we are trustees of the land. Um, it's beautiful, really. So, anyways, thanks, John. I think I talked too
okay.
much. Oh yes, sorry. I'm a father, a father of three, husband as well, son to my beautiful parents who are still alive. I'm very blessed to be their older son. In my culture, same as Aboriginal culture, the older son or the older person in the family carries the weight of the family. So it's a blessing. It's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. I just came from a very long trip looking after some relatives overseas who have been um, unfortunately fled Gaza to war because of war in Egypt. So it's all blessing. It's all great. It's a time I have in this life that God puts in my way to be blessed, and I try my best. But
Mm,
I want to end by saying, Joan, thanks for having me here, and uh, I know that if I do something silly or bad, you're gonna give it to me in my face, which is wonderful, which is great. And I invite everybody to do the same with me. Like if you see something, don't be shy. Just come out and say it because most likely I wouldn't have noticed I'm doing something bad. Just the way I am.
yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Louay. I want to say some things about our relationship before we talk about. I invited you here because I wanted to hear from somebody who is from Palestine about what's going on, and we'll get to that. But right now, we both come from a culture that is relational rather than transactional. And
Right,
so some of you know that I initiated Joan Jack Law Office and my staff. We initiated the Indian Day School, the original Indian Day School class action. No other firms had done that in Canada, and we did that work. And that's a whole other story. But the point when I met Louay was one of the lowest points, hardest points in my life and in my career, because I had really accepted to take on something much way bigger than me. And I knew it from day one. And so Louay and his staff approached because Joan Jack Law Office was basically going broke, and approached and said, if you want to join Alghoul and Associates, you can. And so we went, like you said, we went for lunch, and I had never met him before. And oh my goodness, my daughter Lonnie's actually watching. I see it in the comments.
Oh,
The first time ever, I think she's watching my podcast live. Anyway, welcome, Lonnie. So Lonnie was a part of that work at Joan Jack Office, a critical part of that work. Anyways, Louay and I went for lunch, and I had never met him. I had never really met, I didn't know anybody from Palestine that I was aware of or anything. I didn't know anything about you and your people. And we were at lunch, and then I was eating something, and Louay was sitting across from me, and I know I'm mispronouncing your name too, but he was looking at what I was eating, and he said, "Can I try some of that?" And I was like, "Oh my God, no white people ever asked me to eat something on my plate." I was like, "We do that all the time at our house, let's see, give me some, let's see, go on." And so I said to him, "Okay." And then he just reached over and with his fingers, and he picked it up and he ate it. And I was like, "Okay, this is the guy I want to work with, because I could see right away we had a similar life, in terms of the root of our culture. And the other thing that's been important to me, Louay, that I learned, because Louay is very doesn't brag about himself, never ever ever says anything, and that's the same in my culture. Like I've shared with people that in the culture of individualism, it's the culture of subscription. I am the best lawyer, I am the best doctor, I am. If you don't say that in the mainstream, people think you're no good. Whereas in our culture, if you go around saying, I'm this, I'm that, people will just look at you like you're nuts. And in fact, they'll oppress you. If you're trying to get too big, in the language they say, "Tego kichinendas again," like, don't try to act like you're a big shot, don't try to act you're more important than you are. So I believe that your culture is the same in that, because I've seen that in you. Like, he never. So what I want to say about you, it's the process of ascribing, like you said a bunch of nice things about me. So what I want to say impressed me was, as I got to know you, how many residential school hearings did you personally do?
167.
167. And for those of you that don't know, those were the individual hearings where people shared their personal horrible story of physical and sexual violence that was perpetrated on them. And Louay did 167 of those hearings himself. That's amazing. I did, I think, three, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. It was too traumatic. I was like, I can't do this. And then the other part that really impacted me was that, as far as I know, okay, for those of you that don't know the residential school settlement well, the settlement was broken into two parts. There was the common experience payment. Anybody who went to residential school, even for one day, got $10,000 and then $3,000 for every year they attended. And that was a common experience payment for things like getting their head shaved, getting soap put in their mouths, like the common horror. That's what that was for. So 10,000 and 3,000. And then the other part of the settlement was the individual assessment process, where each residential school student could put forward a claim based on their individual personal experience of harm. And so how that was paid for under the settlement was, in contingency work, it's generally 30%. The fees are generally 30%. Anything you hire a lawyer to sue Toyota or whatever, if they're going to take 30 or more, 45, whatever the client will agree to, they'll take. And so under the settlement, 15% of the fees in the individual assessment process were paid for by Canada through the settlement, and 15% of the fees were paid for by the student as a part of the settlement. Now, I know all of the Indigenous lawyers I know that did the hearings didn't take a penny from the students. They only took the 15% from Canada. I know many other lawyers that took, because they were entitled to. That was the deal. 15 from Canada, 15 from the students. You're the only non-Indigenous lawyer that I know that didn't take a penny from the students. And that blew me out of the water. If you do the math, the average settlement was $100,000. So that's $30,000 in fees, 15,000 from Canada, 15,000 from the student. Take 15,000 and times it by 167 students on average. You left all that money on the table. And I said to you, why did you do that? Why did you do that? I was so amazed that and I'll just share my memory of the answer. And if you want to add anything, please do. So my memory in that moment was that you said, I wouldn't have earned it. That's not I only take money I earn. And not just because you're entitled to it, eh? And so I don't know if you want to say anything. Now I outed you.
No, don't say no.
Okay. Yeah, no, he's a very good man. The other thing I remember you saying, you shared a little bit about your culture as a Muslim person. You shared about the similarity in our cultures about the seven generations. And
Yeah.
if you earn, maybe share that part. Like, if you earn money now, how is that impacting the next generations?
It's more of a Palestinian as well as a Muslim culture, but we believe that what you do is reflects basically on your children, grandchildren as well. Like, for example, like whether it's money or work. Like one of the things we believe in the reason why you have to be good to others, and including the number one is your parents. That's the highest people that you look after, and then the family, whether the inner family or the outer family, and then the community around you, and so on. And there are many, many of you who, the reason I got this in my throat is because I remember that the many times you try to be good to people and they try to, excuse my language, screw you, even though you're friends and but the reason why you keep going and keep doing what you need to do in a good way is because we believe that this thing carries over, carries forward. So if you're good to your parents, your children are going to be good to you. If better than you're good to your parents, and so on and so on. Same thing with money that you earn. But my money that I earn, I don't believe that my money is mine to that is mine. I believe this is something that God or the Spirit puts in my way. Either I use it in a good way or in a bad way, but I'd be responsible for this money. I'd be questioned about it. Well, how did I get it, and what did I spend it in? And whatever I leave to my children is not mine. That's theirs. So there's a saying in my culture: enjoy your kids' inheritance. Like work with it, but not necessarily spend it, but use it in a way that will carry your spirit over into the next world, and so on, because that's what you do. Now that applies to your time, your money, your health, your smile to someone's face, I strongly believe that that's in my teachings. I strongly believe that everyone, not I'm not just limited to a culture or a group of people or a region.
Human being.
Everyone in this world,
Yeah.
human being. I do believe that any human being, um, 99% of them have one good thing better than me. So I
Mm-hmm.
need to listen to them. I need to try to learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
It humbles me to be that, to understand and believe that, strongly believe it, and allows me to be a student to them, regardless of their age. So even if it's 12-year-old kid, I
Mm-hmm.
need to see what they have to offer. So I have to listen and I have to be open to learn. I think that when I was learning about the indigenous culture of Canada, that's what really attracted me to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Very deeply rooted, very strongly connected to the, like one of the mistakes I've done, and again, you have to understand, like when I came to Canada in 1989, I didn't have someone from the indigenous culture welcome me and teach me and I believe in I do I'm also an immigration lawyer, so I believe that needs to be done, that needs to be
Yeah,
implemented. Really
absolutely.
think so. It wasn't until like the last 2 years as lawyers, just the last 2 years or 3 years, that we started to be forced to learn about the indigenous culture and the background and the groups of people who lived in the land, whether in Manitoba or in Canada, and how they interacted in the languages. Like this should have been done back in law school.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, before that even.
Yeah.
So so I do believe that when I learned about the culture, that is so similar to my background. It's so similar that um, I can only invite you to come over into my family table to see it. Like it's
Yeah,
amazing,
it
and
is.
it's different than your daily today, and that's what I struggle with. Um, this politically correct that you have to be with everybody, this space that you have to respect with everybody's space, and a lot it alienates us from one another. It
Mm.
makes us not honest in expressing what we think. You cannot learn from someone unless you're really honest about the questions you ask. You have
Mm-hmm.
to, and
Let's
that's
go
what you
there.
do.
Let's go there. Let's go there. So, let's talk. I would like you to just share. I don't really. I'm gonna, as you speak, I'm gonna write down if I have any questions. But I want you to. I want you to share what you want to share about what's going on for your people in Palestine.
Mm.
Because most of us, we just watch the news. That's it. Even
Yeah,
if we do that, you know. So
yeah.
yeah, I'd like you to just share what you want to share.
Wow.
Hmm.
Um, I want to start by saying what you hear about Palestine and Israel is really simple. It's not complicated. Every time you hear the news, especially in the West, Here, it's a complicated case. It's a long history. It's not. It's very, very simple. It's very, and I'm going to use this uh, example, and I do understand and appreciate there's differences between the cultures and the two indigenous cultures. 100% that's true. But I want to just use it so that it's going to be easier for us to understand. The Palestinian people, whether they're Jews or Christians or Muslims or Baha'is or non-believers or whatever, they're Palestinians. They're people that who belong to that region, to that land. They're no different than indigenous people of Canada, who are also Christians and other religions and traditional and so on. The religion doesn't define the
Mm,
the the genuinity of your indigenous belongings. So
mm,
let's make that very clear. So that's the first thing we need to clear and make it simple. An indigenous person to Canada or indigenous person to Palestine is not defined by the religion that you follow. Okay, let's
right.
make that clear.
Yeah.
Um, Now let's move to the next step. Oh, well, who are the indigenous people of Palestine and why is it called Israel and so on? Well, historically, and when I say this, I invite everybody who listens to me to go to the Old Testament and the Wikipedia and the books and the Google and search this information because we're not told this information, so it's hard for us to kind of believe it. But Palestine or that region always existed and had people living in there. They're called the Canaans. And the Canaans are, if you look at history from the biblical sense of history, you will define the sons of Adam, basically, or the children of Adam, into Semite and Aramic and so on. There were seven of them. So the people of Palestine were Semites. They're the same as the Iraqi people. They're both Semites.
Hmm.
And they lived there for many, many thousands of years. And as we know, the biblical story of Abraham, who was thrown in the fire, we all know the story. This happened in Iraq.
Mm,
So Abraham, after this happened to him and his brother, and his brother's child, whose name is Lut, Prophet Lut in the Old Testament, they immigrated from Iraq to Palestine, like I did when I immigrated from Middle East to Canada. So I'm not Abraham, but I'm just giving the example of just to understand. I'm not anywhere close to being Abraham. Well, I don't want to be actually. It's too difficult. but but this is the example. Abraham immigrated from Iraq to Palestine, and I immigrated from Middle East to Canada. And Abraham had already been married to Sarah, who was also Iraqi. Well, it wasn't called Iraq at that time; it was called Babylons or something like that. And then he married also Hagar, who came from Egypt and had two children. Both children were born in Palestine, and I had three children from my wife, who's Palestinian from Middle East, and all my three children were born in Canada. My children are Canadian citizens, but they're not Indigenous Canadians. Is that
mm.
clear? Very
Yeah.
clear. They are Canadians, but they're not Indigenous Canadians. I cannot claim to be Indigenous person or my children to be Indigenous Canadians.
Mm,
And Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, and Ishmael and Isaac were all were lived in Palestine, born in Palestine, the two children, but they're not indigenous to the land of Palestine. They are
mm,
Palestinians who lived there and immigrated there, but they're not indigenous to them. The children of Ishmael went to Arabia, as we know, and Isaac stayed in Palestine. Isaac married a woman who was from Iraq. His mom, Sarah, insisted that he goes to Iraq, marry his cousin from her brother, and bring him to Palestine. So he did. And he had two children when he was older, Jacob, who is named Israel, later on the prophet Jacob, and his brother, and I don't remember his name, I think it's Ashawa or something like that. Both of them married people from Iraq, children, women from Iraq, and brought them to Palestine. Both of them, in fact, Jacob married two sisters from Iraq, and the two sisters had two servants. So they gifted the servants to Jacob. So Jacob, lucky guy, had four wives, or not sure lucky actually. I think he was. I think it's a headache. It's a big headache. But he had four wives, anyways, and he stayed in Palestine for some time, had some children there. Then he immigrated to outside of Palestine to Midian, south around Sinai area. All of children of Jacob were born in Palestine, but from a mom who was also from Iraq. So Jacob himself was Palestinian, but not indigenous because both his parents were not from Palestine. He married a wife or a woman from Iraq. So him and his wife were not indigenous to Palestine, but they were Canadians like us, Palestinians. And all his children were born out in Palestine, but they were not indigenous to the land. So the claim that this is a complicated issue and so on, it's not really. It's they're Palestinians. I'm Canadian. Nobody can say you're not Canadian. I am Canadian, but I cannot, or my children, Omar, Salah, and Rostam, cannot claim that they are indigenous to Canada. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not saying that they don't have belonging to Palestine. Of course they do. But when we talk about who is indigenous to the land and so on, we cannot undermine the importance of understanding the relationship you have to the land as an indigenous person
Mm-hmm.
versus someone who lived on the land and appreciated the living on the land with the indigenous people of the land. And that applies to whether it's Australia or New Zealand or Canada or anywhere there is indigenous people to the land. We have to respect and appreciate that. So, as you know, the story went on, and Jacob and his children, through Joseph, went to Egypt and lived in Egypt. And a few hundred years later, after they were the children of Israel, which is the children of Jacob, were enslaved by the pharaohs from the south who overtook the Hyksos. So Joseph lived with the Hyksos in the north of Egypt. That that empire was overtaken by the pharaohs from the south, and all the people of Hyksos were taken into slavery, as we know the history. And then many years later, they came back and lived in Palestine. Okay, so at that time, there are people who came from Egypt into Palestine. They intermarried with Palestinians. So at that time, Moses was there. So there was Judaism. So the religion of Judaism came through Moses. And we have, for the first time, Palestinians who are Jews as well. So we have Palestinians who lived and believed in the religion of the land that we used to live in, believe in. Then we had people who came and intermarried with us. So we had also indigenous people to the land who were Jews, and then they became Christians, and then they became Muslims, and then became Baha'is, and so on. So my family, we have people who are Jews, and we have people who are Christians, we have people who are Muslims, we have people who don't believe in God in my own family, which runs way back almost 2,000 years before Abraham came to Palestine. So I am Palestinian, and I have cousins who are Jews and Christians, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're all Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's a story I want to share with you. It kind of clears this misunderstanding. Um, when in 1948, in May 1948, my grandfather lived in a village called Sarafand Al Amar, and the way my grandmother told us the story. She was the one who raised my dad and his children, his brothers, sorry. And she says the story to me when I was 11. She says, one day we knew about the Western. This is how she describes them: the Western people, the white people. She says this is how she describes them coming to Palestine and taking over the land in 1948. And she says your grandfather and the people of the village went to fight the invaders.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to be remember this word, right? The Western or the invaders. That's how they viewed them. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't view them as Christians or Jews or something like that. They viewed them as invaders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my grandfather died in that battle, defending his family and his village. My grandmother and the children had left the village because they were invading the village, and then they went back, and she was looking for the the body of my grandfather. And she says that, and I had one uncle, his name's Muhammad. His hair was all white. I was 12. He was probably in his early 30s. So I asked her, why is his hair so white? And she was describing this to me, the horrific story. Anyways, she's moving the bodies, and she's saying it to me without understanding the impact that it had on me. She's saying, we're moving the bodies looking for your grandfather, and we move the body and we see Muhammad, our neighbor, and we move the body and we see Mikhail, which is in English Michael, and we move the body, we see Dawood, which is in English David. And in my mind, I thought that she's going to be mentioning all Arabic names because in my mind, that's what I envisioned Palestine to be. And so I asked her, who's Michael and who's David? And she said Michael was our Christian neighbor, and David was our Jewish neighbor. They all went to their grandfather fighting this Westerns. So it became crystal in my mind, crystal clear in my mind that that was not a Jewish or a Muslim or a Christian fight. This
Mm,
was indigenous people living in the land being invaded by a group from
mhm,
outside. They happened to be Jews, but some few hundred years before that, they were Crusaders, they were Christians, and some few hundred years of that, they were Ottomans, they were Muslims, and so few. So Palestinians people fought all these invaders and overcome them, whether they were Muslims or Christians or Jews. It doesn't matter. When you have an outside body coming to take over your land, you fight them, whether you are Muslim or Christian or Jew
mhm,
or who you are.
mhm,
So that's how simple things are. So
mhm,
today's situation, the Palestinian people in Palestine saying that we are indigenous people to the land. We want to be treated fairly. And what's happening, unfortunately, and I want to be very clear, this is not a Jewish problem. This is not even an Israeli problem. This is a crazy person in power called Netanyahu problem, who have many of his people, by the way, in Israel, Jews and other non-Jews, fighting him. But we don't hear that. This guy is as crazy as, in my opinion, as our South neighbor, Trump,
mhm,
who wants Canada. Like it's just silliness. This guy in Israel says we're going to take over Gaza, we're going to take over West Bank, we're going to kick everybody out, and we're going to. That's just inhumane. It's crazy. And what we've seen and what's big on the news is October 7th and what's happened, but people don't realize that the people of Palestine have been in genocide and an apartheid system since
Well,
1948.
that's what I want to interrupt you there if I can, Louay. That's what I noticed recently on the news was that Hamas hostages. Hamas is releasing hostages, one or two, or the bodies of hostages, which is very sad and wrong, and all of that. I
Yeah,
mean,
of
when
course, of
anybody
course.
dies, it's wrong. And then on the other side, Israel is releasing hundreds of people from prison in Palestine or somewhere. So,
Yeah,
could you explain that? Like, what the
yeah.
heck?
Well, number one,
Why are there so
we
many
don't.
Palestinians in jail somewhere?
Um, well, we. I just want to say we don't we don't support violence in any way, form, or shape. This is unacceptable. But we do support the right of anyone to resist occupation or resist being killed but I don't support Hamas in any way, but I'm just saying that this is in anyone, whether it's in South Africa or is in anywhere in the world that you are fighting for your freedom, you have the right to do that. You should not be called a terrorist in fighting for your freedom or your right to exist. But what happened is like there are if you Google or research or YouTube even 1948 till now, you'll see that there has been hundreds, not tens or thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have been killed in genocide and in many massacres. So on September 2024, um, um, was it sorry, no, 2023? I apologize. Just about a month or so before October 7th, there was over 5,000 Palestinians taken into prison by Israelis who they were Palestinians were protesting the takeover of the one of the holy sites in Jerusalem. So and because they were unfortunately under the Netanyahu regime, he's allowing people who are extremists to try and kill innocent people and destroy homes and so on. So Palestinians were protesting again peacefully. Just look it up. And they came in and they took them into prison, whether they're Christians and Muslims alike. And they put in prison over 5,000 people. And so the Palestinian people in Hamas in the south and Gaza basically were trying to push back and so on. And there was no response. In their mind, I think it was a mistake, but in their mind, they thought, okay, we're gonna go over into the settlements outside of Gaza, which is, by the way, Palestinian land. These settlements are illegal settlements. That's not me who's saying this. It's the United Nations declaration who's saying these settlements, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza, are illegal settlements, basically Palestinian land taken over, and illegal settlers living in them. So in their mind, which was a mistake, they thought, I'm going to go into the settlements, take hostages, and negotiate hostage trade, which is happening unfortunately now after 2 years, to ask the Israelis to release the 5,000 people, and I'll release these
Okay.
people. But what we don't know, which has not been told to us as well, is that there's also tens of thousands of Palestinians who were taken into prison 20 years ago, 10 years ago, as children, the age of 11 and 12 years old, being in prison for 20 years. And I mean, the stories are all over the news. Um, the sad part is I went to Israel in 2010, and I've seen people in the street when they were building the wall that
Mm.
is dividing the West Bank from Israel.
Hmm.
I've seen Israelis, Jewish Israelis in the streets holding, signs and protesting against the government for this inhumane treatment of Palestinians.
Hmm.
So just keep in mind that's not what you're seeing in the news is not really what is happening on the floor over there. There are many great people, many good people, and good people with good hearts identify themselves as human. As I started my introduction, who feel for other human regardless of their age or religion and so on, and who wants to have a resolution with the indigenous people of the land and who wants to live together with them. But they are faced with some extremists, unfortunately, Netanyahu government right now. I think if you look at the history of that region and how the Palestinian people said, they fought from 1948 till 1967, and unfortunately, Israel was supported by Britain and the United States and taking more and more of the land, and people have no way of fighting back. Finally, in sometime in the 80s or 90s, the president of the Palestinian Liberation, Yasser Arafat, agreed with the president of Israel, Rabin, to come to a peaceful agreement, and that was done with Bill Gates at that time.
Hmm.
So, no, not Bill Gates. What am I talking about? Sorry,
Bill Clinton. Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Clinton.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well, he's
and
probably in there too with his money, but
it's got in there. So
Hmm.
they came to an agreement, and the agreement was, okay, we're going to stop fighting each other. Palestinians will recognize Israel exists and call it a state, and Israel will bring back the land of Palestine to the 1967 United Nations Declaration.
Hmm.
So 40-60, dividing the land. And that's what they agreed on. Well, what happened after they made the agreement and signed everything? Rabin goes back to Israel, and the extremist people in Israel, they kill him. They assassinate Rabin, and they say no agreements. And Zias Arafat also get poisoned a few years after, and goes back into this chaos we have here. So the
So
Palestinian people, yeah,
why, why, why is that little piece of like the Gaza Strip? How big is it?
it's 40 kilometers. It's 40 kilometers. It's not
40
even,
kilometers long, and
yeah,
how many wide, maybe?
8 or 9 kilometers.
8 or 10, let's say 10. So 40 kilometers wide, long, and
Yeah,
10 kilometers wide.
yeah.
Why have people been fighting over that spot for
Yeah.
so thousands of years, trying to come in and take your land? Why?
Not thousands of years. That's the thing. The Palestine was the whole land until 1948.
Okay,
That's all
so
was called
Palestine
Palestine.
included Lebanon and the other parts of the Middle East, or what?
No.
No.
So
Okay.
Palestine included Israel. So what Israel is known
Okay.
to be today, Israel,
Okay.
that map,
Okay.
that was Palestine until
Okay.
1948.
Okay.
And when Israel existed in 1948, my family is one of them. They lived in a village called Sarfad al-Amar, which is now part of Israel.
Mm,
Because my grandfather and the men were killed, the women and the children, they fled into, they called a Nakba, or in English, the catastrophe, and they fled into Gaza because they're trying to run away from being killed. So they
mm,
went into Gaza as refugees, and they lived in Gaza as refugees. And Gaza became the refugee camp of the people. Gaza and West Bank became the refugee camp of many hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled their homes because they were massacred and killed, and
mm.
so on. So Gaza at that time was under the control of Egypt. That's why it was a safe
Oh,
zone.
okay. Okay.
And West Bank was under the control of Jordan, which was
Mm,
also a safe zone. So these two zones,
okay.
why do we have West Bank and Gaza, is because they were under the control at that time of Egypt and Jordan. So the Palestinians ran into them. Some Palestinians stayed inside of Israel, and they are even called the Arab Israelis right now.
Mm,
So in to speed up things, not to confuse everyone, but to speed up things very quickly, um, the the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which came to an agreement with the Rabin through Yasser Arafat being their leader, they agreed on peaceful resolution with Israel. We don't want to fight anymore. Let's live together. Let's recognize each other and let's live in peace. And then both presidents were killed. Um, the people of Palestine after that made an election saying that the agreement that we came with Israel, recognizing Israel as a state, um, now it is void because what's happening is that if you look at the news even today, you'll see the news very misleading. They'll say Israel and Hamas. They'll say
mm,
Israel and the Palestinian people. You will never see, I can challenge anybody in the
mm,
Western news, you will never see Israel and Palestine.
mm,
There's no recognition of a state called Palestine,
mm,
even though there was an agreement in 1967 by the United Nations, even though there was an agreement with Clinton and Yasser Arafat and Rabin to have two states resolution. Even though that is the case, the news always says Israel and Hamas, Israel and Palestinian people, never Israel and Palestine. And the reason they do this is they don't want to give recognition to the Palestinian people in the West here, unfortunately.
mhm, mhm,
Unfortunately, the media is being very influenced by this. So Gaza is there's two places left for the Palestinian people, from owning the whole land in 1948 to being invaded by the Western uh, immigrants and taken over the land, and to being divided into almost 60-40. And now we own, as Palestinian people, the land that we live in without having any settlements inside is less than 9% or less than that even.
wow.
And that land is the one that we are being kicked out of, which is
Okay.
Gaza and the parts of the West Bank. This is the land, the 9% or 11%, I think, is what they're being taken away from us and want to clear us completely out by this extremist Netanyahu government.
Mhm.
And
Do you
that's
have
this is
any?
what it's all about.
There's a question from somebody in the audience. Do you have any views about the involvement of China and Russia? And then I also want to ask you about Trump's idea. So, what do you think about China and Russia's involvement in what's going on in your country there, in your homeland? Do you think
We
it has
we
any bearing
there,
or?
there's no aid coming in from any of them. There's no involvement, but there has been a lot of countries who have used this um, disaster to their advantage. So to try and
Mm,
negotiate with it, whether in the Arab world or whether in the Western world, try to use that as a bargaining chip to try and get their own best interest.
mm, mm.
China is one of them. China is using Tibet as a token with the United Nations to give its vote with the veto power that they have with Palestine and so on. Um,
Can you say a
but
bit
they
more
have,
about that? Like, could you say a bit more about that? Like, I don't really get what you said there. So
sure,
China is using Tibet, like Tibet's are indigenous to their
Tibet,
land, to
yeah,
Tibet,
and they're taking
and
yeah, and they've taken over the Tibet, and they're basically taking over Tibet to become part of China, and they're using that with Britain and the United States to say we will overlook what's happening over there if you look what's happening over here,
okay, I got it now. I got
because
it.
the United Nations system is really an unfair system. If you really look close to it, this is all about people in power. You have an assembly, United Nations Assembly, which is all the nations, and they get to vote on big issues. And by the way, all the resolutions of the United Nations was come to Palestine, all of them have been okay. But the problem is none of them gets approved or approved and move forward,
Implemented, implemented. Yeah.
implemented, because of the veto power that five nations have in the United Nations. So
Hmm.
there are five nations in the United Nations, who have veto power, who can say, nope, one of us can say, nope, I disagree on all of the United Nations Assembly's decision. So, so unfair, like it's so
So the
silly.
five, let me guess, okay? Let me guess. US, um, Russia, China,
China,
uh, where?
Britain,
Britain, right?
and
And
France.
France, huh?
And those ones
And
are
how
the
did these buggers end up with veto power in the United Nations where we're all supposed to be human?
yeah. So you can, they will vote to stop the war, for example, in Palestine, and the United States will vote it all the time. They will vote to give aid, send aid to the Palestinian people in Palestine, and United States will vote it. It's just so
Against it.
silly, like if you look into
Yeah.
it. And those five, by the way, are well, Britain and France used to be the colonial powers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you look at Israel, and I want again, I'm a big promoter for living side by side, being one nation, working together towards peace. I'm a big supporter of that. I'm against anyone who says I'm better than you because of my race, my culture, my language, my color. I'm so much against that because it's, I even go as far as applying that to human and animals. I don't think we're even better than animals in that sense. Like we are all trustees on this earth. We are all spirits from God. So to be even so discriminative against other human being, like if you look at Australia and realize that the indigenous people of Australia were called animals in the Constitution until 1930 something. That's how much insanity there is in the world, right?
Yeah.
So so I am for living together, and recognizing the just rights of the people regarding of their religion and building things together. And I think that is the only way to go forward. But I'm against what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine and uh, and what's happening to our people. A big promoter about people going and reading for themselves and learning for themselves, and a big promoter about making this as simple as it is really. Um, I spoke with many people who are good friends of mine who are from Israel and from the Jewish faith, who would say to me, "Well, we don't want to live. We don't want to have. We don't want to. We want the two-state solution. We don't want to have everybody living together because we're afraid that the Palestinian population might overtake us." And I was like, "Come on, man! Like, why would anybody don't be why is there fear in coming to
Hmm.
peace? Like, why are you, like, you cannot enslave people, you cannot put people in camps, you cannot people, living in this mentality of apartheid states, that I'm better than you because of my background or color or religion, does will not survive. It will end up losing. You lose. No human being will live under that kind of condition. Nobody, actually, your own children will have an open mind in the future, and you cannot keep brainwashing them. There will come a time and stage where they will say, "This is wrong," and
Hmm.
you'll lose the battle. Okay. It's
Yeah.
much better to actually adopt the concept of we're all the same people. We're all, I'm sorry I invaded you. I apologize for what happened. Let me try to work with you to, but I don't, it makes no sense to throw me in the ocean. Of course, nobody's going to do that. That's just silliness. You know, it's just,
Speaking of silliness, we have a few minutes left. I kind of try to keep it to the 1 hour, but let's segue to President Trump. And I know what reaction Brian and I watch the news, and of course we watch it with a filter. We know it's not accurate completely, but we still watch the news. And I couldn't believe what I heard when he was saying what he said, which was, if you're listening to this and you haven't heard, basically, and I'm just using my own words, President Trump said, well, the United States will own Gaza, and we're going to turn it into a place where rich people can play.
yeah.
And we'll move all of the Palestinians out of there and put them somewhere nice where they'll be happy, and jobs and homes and whatever. And we're going to bulldoze this all down and build this beautiful place. So what did you think when that happened?
Well, number one, he's crazy. Like he's doing this with Canada and Greenland and other things. I think he's a very smart business person, but he's a
Mm-hmm.
bully. He's a
Yeah.
bully that nobody can stop because he has all the weapons in the world. But his statement is echoing exactly what happened to the Indigenous people of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move them out of Winnipeg. Let's move them out of Toronto. Let's put them somewhere nice where we can put them in a nice place. They're going to be very happy. And we're going to make this city that they lived in or the place that had the rivers we're going to make it very beautiful people and people they can come and live if they want to later on. But an insulting thing. What an insulting statement to make. And who are you, Mr. President, to own another person's land? Or it's just
Well, they did it in Canada. I mean, the Hudson Bay Company was granted most of Canada, most of our land.
yeah,
Yeah, no, it's not a new idea he had.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny that Palestine or Israel is the last colonizing country in the world.
Hmm.
There is no other country in the world that exists today that believes in colonialism and apartheid system.
Huh.
That it finished. Last one before that was South Africa, and thankfully that's gone. And look how beautiful South Africa is right now. Look how wonderful people are living from a different culture and colors. And they were actually the lawyers in the in the international court fighting for Palestine, asking for the same thing to happen there. But Israel, unfortunately, right now is the last colonizing apartheid state, and this has to stop. And the sooner the crazy people in Israel realize that, the sooner they realize that, the better it is for everybody's human rights and everybody's life and peace and
Mm-hmm.
live
Mm-hmm.
together peacefully. Recognize that you came in 1948 as invaders, regardless of your religion. Like when Hitler invaded France, we didn't say that Christians invaded France. We said that German invaded France or Hitler invaded France. They were both Christians. Why are we making this a religious war? It's not a religious war. This is really um, according to Balfour Declaration. Again, another British minister promised Palestine to the Jewish people of Europe, not because he was nice, by the way. If you look at Balfour, Balfour was a very racist, anti-Semitic person. His idea was to clear all the Jews of Europe. Then I don't like he didn't like Jewish people in Europe. He wanted to clear them out of Europe and put them somewhere far away from him. This is Balfour. He was not a nice guy. He was a racist, anti-Semitic person who actually wanted to deprive British citizens, Jewish British citizens, from their nationality as British and throw them outside because he doesn't want Jewish
Yeah.
living in Europe.
Yeah.
That's what he did. And a British minister promised my land to people, and that's where we're in today, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Britain, man, I tell you, Britain is is the source of so many problems in the world.
We're living with the impact, the generational impact as Indigenous people within Canada. We're living with the generational impact of colonization and the continued legalized racism in this country.
Yeah.
We could have another show on that, but yeah, I just really want to thank you for coming. And we have a few minutes, and I just want to make sure you've said everything that's in your heart that you wanted to share right now. I mean, I know there's a lot in your heart, but I just want to make sure that you feel that you had space to speak and be heard.
I want to say that I have nothing but love and respect to every human being, even the people right now who are killing my people. I
Mhm.
wish them wisdom. I wish them that they realize what they're doing is wrong before their spirit goes into the next world and they're tortured for eternity. I wish that they will reflect back on their actions and realize this before it's too late. Um, Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody some more than others, but um, but we need to live up to those mistakes and move forward to live together. The two indigenous people of Palestine and Canada are different, but they share so many similarities,
Yeah.
over 70 or 80%. And that's what made me realize how fortunate I was to be put in this path. and how ignorant I was when I came to Canada, not knowing the culture and the people. And I will always be a student, to any culture, to any human being. And I hope that people just can accept this concept, and I think we'll have peace doing that. I think that's a good formula.
Thank you, Louay. So I'm all about the earrings, okay? I'm all about the red lipstick when I'm not in the bush and the earrings. And I have a serious beaded earring addiction. And these were made by Becky Ann, and she's in Winnipeg, an Anishinaabe woman. And
Nice.
in our language, I'm not a super fluent or anything, but I can get by. And the word for owl is one of my favorite words. It's kukuku'u. I just loved as a child. I
Cool.
loved the way it sounded, kukuku'u. And so she made these, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to have them. But she's on Facebook, a very humble woman. She sews to feed her family, and yeah. So I think we'll wrap up a little bit early here. We're 5 minutes early, but that's okay. I'm gonna go off the live, and then you and I will say goodbye privately. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for coming, Louie. I love you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, guys, for talking too much. My apologies. I'm a
Ah.
lawyer. I'm a lawyer.